The Vale of Night in the village of Baimara, nestled amidst the dense, whispering jungle of Bangladesh, the nights were unusually long. The sun seemed to set earlier each day, and the darkness that followed was not just an absence of light, but an oppressive presence that weighed heavily on the villagers. The story begins with Aisha, a young woman who had returned to Baimara after years of studying abroad. Her return was not welcomed with open arms. The village had changed, or perhaps the village revealed its true nature under the cover of darkness. Aisha's first night back was marked by the eerie silence that fell over the village once the sun dipped below the horizon. She sat by her window, listening to sounds that didn't belong, whispers in the wind, footsteps where no one should be walking, and the occasional mournful howl that echoed through the trees. The next day, she visited the local school where she was to teach. The children were unusually quiet, their eyes wide with fear or perhaps something else she couldn't quite decipher. The headmaster, Mr. Rahman, warned her, "Do not venture out after dark, Aisha. The night here is different." As days turned into nights, Aisha began to notice patterns. Every night, villagers locked themselves in their homes by 6 p.m. sharp, windows draped, doors barricaded. No light escaped from any house, as if they were hiding from something or someone. One evening, driven by curiosity and a sense of duty to understand the fear that gripped her community, Aisha decided to stay out. She sat on her porch, armed with nothing but a flashlight and her smartphone, which had no signal once the sun disappeared. That night, the air grew cold, and a mist crept in from the jungle. Aisha heard whispers, not like the wind, but voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize, yet it felt ancient, as if the words themselves were older than the village. Then, she saw figures in the mist, tall, shadowy forms that moved with purpose, but without making a sound. Her heart raced, but she kept her light steady, watching as these figures moved towards the village center. She followed, her fear mixing with a morbid fascination. At the center, where the old banyan tree stood, the figures gathered, their forms becoming clearer under the moonlight. They were not human, their limbs were too long, their heads slightly misshapen, and their eyes glowed with a red that seemed to pulse with malice. Aisha should have run, but terror rooted her to the spot. One of the creatures turned, its gaze locking onto her. It spoke, its voice a grating, metallic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Why do you linger here, where the veil is thin?" Before she could respond, a cacophony of sounds erupted from the jungle, a mix of screams, laughter, and cries that sounded both human and animal. The creatures turned their attention towards the noise, and in that moment Aisha fled, back to her home, locking every door and window behind her. The next morning, the village was abuzz with whispers of what had happened. Mr. Rahman confronted her, his face pale. "You saw them, didn't you? The night walkers." He explained that the village was built on a site where two worlds met, one of the living and one not. Every night, as the veil between these worlds weakened, the night walkers roamed, searching for those foolish enough to be out. They were not malicious by nature, but were curious about the living, often leading them to reveal their deepest fears or secrets, which could be lethal. Aisha, now part of this secret, began to research, finding old manuscripts in the village elder's home. They spoke of rituals to strengthen the veil, of sacrifices made in the past, and of a curse that bound the villagers to this cycle of hiding from the night. She decided to confront the darkness rather than hide from it. Gathering the bravest of the villagers, they performed an ancient ritual under the banyan tree, a ritual meant to seal the veil for good. It involved chanting, offerings of food and light, and a dance that mimicked the movement of the stars. As they performed, the night grew darker, the air colder, and the whispers louder. But they continued, driven by desperation and courage. Suddenly, the ground shook, the banyan tree seemed to groan, and a light, not from any source they could see, enveloped them. The night walkers appeared, not as threats but as participants in what seemed like a final, mutual acknowledgement. When dawn broke, the village was silent, not with the oppressive silence of fear but the peaceful quiet of relief. The sun rose higher than it had in years, and the darkness receded to where it belonged, behind the veil of night. Aisha never left Baimara again, having found her purpose in guarding this newfound peace, teaching the children not just the subjects of school but the lessons of courage, knowledge, and community. The village thrived, the nights no longer a terror but a time of rest, knowing the veil was strong. Yet, in the deepest part of the jungle, where no villager ventured, the whispers sometimes returned, a reminder of what once was and what could be if ever the veil weakened again. This tale wraps up the horror with a touch of hope, blending elements of local folklore with the universal theme of confronting one's fears. Heart of Mine embraces, all day through. The photographs began to flutter, though there was no wind. In each one, Eleanor's lips were moving now, singing along. Her eyes were fixed on Sarah. In that small cafe, the park across the way. Something cold brushed against Sarah's shoulder, a hand, she thought, though she couldn't bring herself to turn around. The humming was everywhere now, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, harmonizing with Eleanor's recorded voice. The children's carousel, the chestnut trees, the wishing well. Sarah felt something being pressed into her hand. She looked down to find an old camera, its leather case cracked with age. In her other hand appeared a silk scarf, soft as a whisper. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day. The closet door swung shut behind her. Sarah knew she should be terrified, should be screaming, should be fighting to escape. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her, like a blanket of snow. She understood now. Eleanor hadn't been trying to scare her, she'd been trying to show her something. To share something. In everything that's light and gay. Sarah raised the camera. In its viewfinder, she saw a man's face, not William Howard, but Michael, her ex-Michael, who had threatened to ruin her when she caught him embezzling from their joint practice. Michael, who had followed her to Boston. Michael, who had a key to her apartment building because he charmed the superintendent last week, claiming to be her brother. I'll always think of you that way. Sarah smiled as she heard footsteps in the bedroom. The door handle turned slowly. The humming grew louder, and she felt Eleanor's cold hand squeeze her shoulder in solidarity. I'll find you in the morning, son. Michael's face when he opened the closet door was everything she'd hoped for. He saw her, saw Eleanor standing behind her, saw all the photographs with their watching eyes. He tried to scream, but the silk scarf was already around his neck. And when the night is new. Later, after it was done, Sarah developed the photographs in Eleanor's old darkroom, hidden behind a false wall in the closet. They came out beautifully, Michael's expression of terror captured forever in black and white. She hung them alongside Eleanor's, two women's stories of justice intertwined. I'll be looking at the moon. The humming never bothered Sarah after that. Some nights, she even joined in, her voice blending with Eleanor's in the darkness of their closet. And every so often, when the moon was full and the night was deep, they would develop new photographs together, of men who thought they could hurt women and get away with it, of men who learned too late that some songs never end, that some wrongs must be righted, that some voices refuse to be silenced. But I'll be seeing you. The end.